History's verdict. Montgomery. On August the 21st, 1937, a mother of 3 was bitten by an insect while playing on a beach with her youngest son. She thought nothing of it at first. After all, she was on holiday in England and believed, as people still do, that such bites were harmless. However, the bite became infected and the woman fell seriously ill. She was hospitalized, and by the 19th of October 1937, surgeons amputated her legs in a final desperate attempt to save her life. This failed, and she died in the arms of her devoted husband, an obscure British Army officer. His name was Bernard Montgomery, and his wife's tragic death contributed to changing the course of history's greatest conflict, the Second World War. After the funeral, he shut himself in a room and refused to see anyone for days. Intense loneliness descended on me after my wife's death. This loneliness would haunt him for the rest of his long life. But Montgomery vowed that it would not destroy him. One day he emerged from his room in a whirlwind of energy and determination that would also accompany him ever after. He had transferred his fidelity to serving his country in the colossal test he knew it would face. I became completely dedicated to my profession. Montgomery is one of the most controversial figures of World War II. For some, the brilliantly successful battlefield commander who masterminded the defeat of Nazi Germany in the West. For the soldiers of many nationalities who fought under him, the inspirational leader who led them to victory after victory and who cared deeply about their lives. For his colleagues and superiors, the arrogant, overcautious egomaniac. For many Americans, a patronizing Brit who underestimated their soldiers and commanders. For many Britons, one of their greatest ever heroes. To understand why Montgomery continues to divide opinions so sharply, we must trace the genesis of the victor of El Alamein from his fascinating early life. My father was a saint. I worshipped him. My mother was a disciplinarian. Montgomery's father was an Anglican clergyman. Monty always claimed his mother was a domineering and unloving woman. However, his brothers disputed this and insisted Bernard was the bad boy of the family, the son who caused their hard-working young mother constant problems because he had inherited her indomitable will. His family moved to Tasmania when he was 2, returning to England when he was 13, self-sufficient and intolerant of authority, in Montgomery's own words. He was nicknamed Monkey at his school in England because he was small, tough, wiry and extremely quick. He was an excellent sportsman in team events, especially when he was captain. His father hoped he would become a clergyman too, and was disappointed when Montgomery decided on a military career. However, his patient father made no attempt to dissuade him. His strong-willed wife reacted very differently. In a curious parallel to the life of Eisenhower, Montgomery clashed with his mother over his desire to join the army. At Sandhurst Royal Military College, Montgomery continued to cause problems. On one occasion, he set fire to the shirt of an unpopular cadet. The boy required hospital treatment, and the young Monty was demoted. On graduation, he had to join a regiment destined for India, as his family was too poor to pay for the lifestyle of an officer in Britain. This first posting ended with the cataclysm that would define the future field marshal. More than any figure in history's verdict, Monty learned from the grim lessons of the First World War. He proved to be an exceptionally brave soldier. He even took one German prisoner by kicking him in the testicles. In the First Battle of Ypres, he won the Distinguished Service Order, a near miss for the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for courage. In the same battle, he was so gravely wounded by a German sniper that a grave was dug for him. Montgomery believed he only survived because he was physically very fit. This contributed to his later insistence that all soldiers under him, generals included, had to exercise regularly. He was shocked by how little contact there was between the generals and the soldiers, and the callousness with which the former played with the lives of the latter. The frightful casualties appalled me. The so-called good fighting generals of the war appeared to me to be those who had a complete disregard for human life. He was determined that he would lead soldiers differently. In a letter to his mother during the bloodbath of World War I, he wrote, "The whole art of war is to gain your objective with as little loss of lives as possible." Montgomery's professional and humanitarian approach to combat was soon applied to a smaller, yet no less bitter conflict. In 1921, he was sent to Ireland to command an infantry brigade fighting the Irish Republican Army. "The behaviour of the army must be kept beyond reproach," he insisted.
Montgomery, himself of Irish descent, believed that Britain should grant Ireland independence. He was convinced that only Cromwell-like massive violence could defeat the IRA, and he warned that no democracy could contemplate such savagery. Prefiguring the respect with which his Second World War enemies would come to view him, even the leaders of the Irish Republican movement valued Montgomery. Tom Barry, the head of the most famous IRA flying column, described Monty as the one British officer who always behaved with great correctness. Given the atrocities and the hatred in the Irish campaign, this is a great tribute to Montgomery as an honourable soldier.
After his experiences in Ireland, Montgomery went to Staff College as an instructor in 1926. Unlike many of his peers, deluded by the prosperity and relative peace of the Roaring Twenties, Monty was convinced the world would go to war again. "I was very certain that my country would be involved in another war. I was determined that I myself would be prepared and trained and ready when the call came, and in my prayers morning and evening, I used to ask that I might be given help and strength so that I might not fail when put to the test." Despite this clairvoyant pessimism for the future of the world, Montgomery discovered true happiness. In 1927, at the age of 39, he fell in love and married Betty Carver. The widow of an officer killed at Gallipoli, she had taught her two young sons to hate war and everything to do with soldiers. Betty belonged to England's artistic community, in contrast to Bernard, who only knew about military matters. Despite the obvious obstacles, they shared a great sense of fun. The marriage flourished and the two became inseparable. For Montgomery, this was the happiest time of his life, and the arrival of his son David, a year later, crowned his bliss. As we know, Betty's tragic death in 1937 brought to an end Monty's 10 years of bliss. Thus came true the words of a fellow officer: "The army is Montgomery's wife, and he has no need for another." His career progressed rapidly with this total dedication to the army. In October 1938, he rose to Major General and was sent to the Middle East. his mission was to suppress a major uprising against the British mandate in a vital strategic region. It was necessary to fuse disparate units into a cohesive fighting division, then train and lead this new force successfully. It gave him experience vitally useful to taking command of the Commonwealth forces in the desert in 1942 and was a task greatly to my liking, he said. He returned to Britain in July 1939, only to see that his country was ill-prepared for the huge war everyone knew was imminent. In September 1939, the British Army was totally unfit to fight a first-class war on the continent of Europe. He was disgusted by both the French and British generals and believed the looming Battle of France was effectively lost before it had begun. The one exception was his corps commander and mentor, General Brooke, whom Monty described as the best soldier that any nation has produced for many years. Brooke respected Montgomery too, and would go on to defend his cause over and over again throughout many difficult trials that saw Monty face dismissal repeatedly. The first of these occasions came in November 1939. Monty was worried by an epidemic of venereal disease among his troops. He issued a divisional order that today seems a model of tolerance and pragmatism. To the conservative figures running the British Army in 1939, it was an abomination. It read, "My view is that if a man wants to have a woman, let him do so by all means, but he must use his common sense and take the necessary precautions against infection." He ordered that condoms be put on sale in army shops, that safe, hygienic brothels be publicised, and that the soldiers be taught the French words for condom so that they could buy them locally. This made Monty, the devout son of a man who was now a bishop, public enemy number one for the army's religious leaders. The chaplains complained to the commander of the British Army in France, Gort. He ordered General Brooke to make Monty publicly retract the order. Brooke refused, knowing this would have meant I should have been forced to withdraw Monty from his division and send him home. Nevertheless, the Calvinist Ulsterman did summon Montgomery to a severe reprimand, describing his orders as obscene. The chaplains had other reasons to complain about Monty despite his unshakable Christian convictions and practices. This was, after all, a man who prayed and read the Bible every single day of his life. Uniquely among divisional commanders, he made Sunday morning church parade voluntary rather than compulsory. He trained the men to the point of exhaustion from Monday to Saturday, then gave them freedom on Sundays to recover. The padres disapproved, but the men quickly began to respect their unorthodox commander. He reinforced this bond with the ordinary soldiers by being the first ever British general to wear battle dress. Monty spent the winter training his troops to move into Belgium and be ready for battle even in darkness. Just such clairvoyant tactics proved to be necessary when the Wehrmacht attacked in May 1940. His division performed outstandingly in the fighting. Even in the retreat to Dunkirk, when the French and British armies were in disarray, his troops fought admirably. To make sure his men were well fed en route to the evacuation site, Monty ordered huge herds of cattle to be driven ahead of them. Montgomery refused to accept the legend of Dunkirk. He knew that the British Army had suffered a crushing defeat and had to learn from its bitter lessons if it could ever hope to beat the Wehrmacht in battle. He made sure that his units of the army did learn these lessons. Back in England, He was placed in charge of the southern defences and worked hard to have his soldiers, all of them, ready to face and defeat the Germans. Total war demanded total fitness from the highest to the lowest. The first point I tackled was the question of fitness, physical and mental. The army in England was not fit and must be made so. And this was not the typical hypocrisy of a senior commander living in luxury at headquarters. Monty really deserved his nickname from Reader's Digest magazine, the Spartan General. Regardless of weather conditions, he went for long runs before breakfast. Montgomery neither smoked nor drank, nor did he swear. He got up at 6 every morning and went to bed at 9. Astonishingly, he would frequently retire at his customary time, even in the midst of some of the biggest battles in world history. Brian Horrocks, one of his most trusted aides, remarked, "I believe he was awakened in the night only half a dozen times during the whole war." To help guarantee his troops were genuinely fit, he ordered all of the men to do a 12-kilometre run once a week. One fat old colonel came with his company doctor asking to be excused this duty, claiming it would kill him. Monty asked the medic if he agreed, and the doctor said he did. To their horror, Montgomery ordered the officer to do the run, adding he would rather the colonel died now than in battle, when it would be awkward to replace him. The colonel did the run and survived. Monty's fitness and self-discipline failed to impress one legendary personality, though. In his first meeting with Churchill, Monty astonished the Prime Minister by drinking water with his meal. He added that he neither drank nor smoked and was 100% fit. Churchill instantly retorted, "I both drink and smoke, and I am 200% fit." Monty also wanted to ensure his men became mentally fit for victory too. He rejected the scorched earth strategy favoured by the government in the event of a German invasion. Montgomery's division was expected to fall back towards the London area. "I said we would not retreat." Thus, confidence in our ability to defeat the Germans was built up. This foreshadowed his famous no-retreat policy when he took over the 8th Army in North Africa, and it tied in with his philosophy of war. The morale of the soldier is the greatest single factor in war, and the best way to achieve a high morale is by success in battle. He would live up to this philosophy in 1942, when he was sent to take command of Churchill's baffled and bewildered 8th Army. 1942 had been the worst year of the war for Britain. Burma and Singapore had fallen to the Japanese, humiliating the British Empire in Asia. German U-boats threatened to starve the United Kingdom into submission. The renewed Nazi offensive on the Eastern Front looked like overwhelming the Soviet Union. The last place where British soldiers were fighting the Germans and Italians was in the North African desert. Yet in June 1942, another disaster occurred. Huge numbers of British and Commonwealth troops were captured at Tobruk. Churchill was incensed by the surrender. Defeat is one thing, disgrace is another. The victor of Tobruk, Rommel, was fast becoming Hitler's favourite general, a German hero and a strategic legend. The oil riches of Arabia were within his reach, resources that would have fueled Hitler's panzers, Stukas and war production. It was conceivable that Germany's Barbarossa forces could pass through the Caucasus and link up with Rommel's Afrika Korps. The stream of Japanese victories in the east had made the even more staggering prospect of an Axis meeting somewhere around the Indian Ocean possible. The Allies really could have lost the war in 1942. Equally horrifyingly, SS Einsatzkommando Egypt was on standby in Athens to move to North Africa and export the final solution to the Holy Land of Palestine. Yet, if the British could achieve a seemingly impossible victory in the desert, the nation would be inspired. Mussolini humiliated, pressure on Stalin relieved, the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean kept open, and Churchill's premiership would be saved. North Africa mattered. The Prime Minister dismissed the commander of the 8th Army, General Auchinleck. The Orc was no fool, but as John Keegan noted, he had every soldierly virtue except the killer instinct. Churchill was sure he knew a general who would change the course of British fortunes. Strafer Gott. But Gott died when his aeroplane was shot down by German fighters. The hitherto obscure Montgomery was appointed to replace him in August 1942. Montgomery was Brooke's choice, not Churchill's. Brooke's faith was based on Monty's talent, not on his affability. I never interfere with Monty in tactical matters. He's generally right. And he doesn't let you forget it. Command of the demoralised 8th Army caused Montgomery to remark that, after having an easy war, things have now got much more difficult. A colleague told him to cheer up, at which point Monty replied, "I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about Rommel." Some historians claim that the 8th Army was not demoralised. A definitive piece of research in autumn 2011 by Dr. Jonathan Fennell of King's College London destroyed that myth. He analysed the men's letters home, sickness rates, psychological disorders, and willingness to surrender. Everything revealed that the men did not want to fight and felt they could not win. He even found that Rommel was more popular with them than any British general. Fennell's conclusion is inarguable. Montgomery radically transformed the morale of the 8th Army from the moment he took command. This was decisive. Everyone in the 8th Army was aware that Auchinleck, like Wavell before him, had drawn up elaborate plans to retreat if necessary, even abandon the Middle East altogether. Monty was having none of it. He was famous for his meticulous planning, but it was never devoted to retreat. In his address to senior officers of the 8th Army on August the 13th, the Spartan General announced, "Here we will stand and fight. There will be no further withdrawal. I have ordered that all plans and instructions dealing with further withdrawal are to be burned, and at once. We will stand and fight here. If we can't stay here alive, then let us stay here dead." Rommel wanted them to stay there dead. He planned to destroy the 8th Army with an encircling attack at Alam el Halfa. Montgomery had been warned by ultra-intelligence of his plan and deliberately left a tempting gap in his front to lure Rommel's forces into a trap. His concealed tanks and the Desert Air Force mauled the onrushing Axis forces. Rommel ordered a retreat. It was his last major offensive in North Africa. Monty chose not to pursue Rommel's forces, as he wanted to fight the next, much greater battle entirely on his own terms. In 2012, British historian Anthony Beevor claimed Montgomery was overrated, but he recognised that he was absolutely brilliant at training his troops. Unfortunately for Rommel, this was true, and Monty wanted time to train his men for the epic confrontation he was planning at an obscure village called El Alamein. On the eve of the British offensive at El Alamein, Montgomery said to his 8th Army, "Let no man surrender so long as he is unwounded and can fight." But Monty didn't limit himself to making big claims. He also trusted his men enough to tell them how he would fight Rommel. "I made the soldiers partners with me in the battle. I always told them what I was going to do and what I wanted them to do. I think the soldiers felt that they mattered, that they belonged." Unlike his predecessors, Montgomery would not chase Rommel back and forth across North Africa, but bring him to a single, decisive battle. A battle that he prepared for painstakingly, building up forces and supplies and training his troops. Churchill wanted quick action, but Montgomery wanted effective action. To achieve it, he needed not only time and resources, but to make sure his men understood his plans and their part in them. Major Sir William Mather commented on the clarity of Montgomery's leadership. He expounded exactly how the battle would take place. What amazed all of us was that it was so easy to remember what he said. It was so clear, and it all happened. On October the 23rd, Montgomery launched Operation Lightfoot with the most titanic artillery barrage heard since the First World War. This awesome bombardment would continue for 10 days. Unlike the generals of the Great War, Monty did not believe artillery was decisive in destroying troops and targets. Instead, he used it to dilute the morale of the enemy and to begin the process he called crumbling, in which the Axis soldiers would lose heart and, more importantly, their ability to concentrate. The most notable victim of crumbling fell early in the battle. Rommel was on sick leave in Austria, and his doomed replacement, General Stumme, died of heart failure the day after the 900 British guns opened fire. Stumme was replaced by General Ritter von Thoma. Hitler, meanwhile, ordered Rommel to return to Egypt immediately. The Battle of El Alamein was hellish for the British and Commonwealth forces at first, almost literally. The Axis front lines were defended by vast minefields known as the Devil's Gardens. Monty's advance was slowed by these, and the fierce, intelligence resistance of the Axis soldiers now back under the Desert Fox's command. On October the 29th, Montgomery withdrew tanks from his northern thrust and ended Operation Lightfoot. British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden thought he was giving up the battle. Churchill fell into despair when he heard that the 8th Army advance might be stalling. Fearing Montgomery was letting the battle peter out as ineffectually as his predecessors, he lamented to Brooke, "Have we not got a single general who can even win one single battle?" Monty provided the answer, and in the affirmative. He had been preparing a new attack, Operation Supercharge, further south to break through Rommel's lines. Scottish, English and New Zealand infantry units achieved this, then British tanks flooded through the gaps, routing the Axis forces. It was the British Army's first major victory of the war over German forces. Monty's troops captured Rommel's deputy, von Thoma. Montgomery surprised his enemy by inviting him to dinner before sending him to captivity. During the meal, von Thoma said of Rommel and himself, "We expected a new form of tactics when we heard of your appointment. We got them, and couldn't deal with them." El Alamein gave hope to all enemies of Nazism that the German forces could truly be defeated decisively in battle. Churchill was elated and, with characteristic hyperbole, later claimed that, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." Monty's troops were exhilarated after years of frustration and humiliation in the desert. British soldiers worldwide were also overjoyed. Military historian Fred Magellani, then a junior officer in the victorious 8th Army, spoke for his comrades when he said of Montgomery, "At a moment when history held its breath, he rallied his country's soldiers as Churchill had rallied its people." The same professionalism caused Monty to take one of his most unfairly criticized decisions. He did not pursue with all of his might the retreating Axis forces after El Alamein. He wanted his men to rest. He also knew that the British generals before him had made this mistake several times, only to discover Rommel was at his most dangerous in such circumstances. Montgomery's jubilant yet exhausted troops recognized the wisdom of their leader's decision. He was not risking their lives and ultimate victory. The war for him was a marathon, not a sprint. On the 11th of November, Remembrance Day in Britain, a grateful King George knighted Monty, who was now Sir Bernard Montgomery. He was also promoted to full general on that same date. On the 15th of November, the British public heard a sound absent since August 1939. Churchill ordered the church bells to ring out all over Britain to celebrate the victory at El Alamein. Until then, the bells had been silent, only to be rung to warn of German invasion. Monty, the son of a priest, was overjoyed. After the church bells rang, wives, mothers and relatives of 8th Army soldiers began writing to him from across the world. They were stunned when Monty replied in personal, handwritten letters. By Christmas 1942, Rommel was hearing a different kind of bell, the death toll for his Africa Corps. He wrote to his wife that he would need a miracle to hold on against the British. What is to happen now lies in God's hands. God, it seemed, was not on Rommel's side. Montgomery's calm yet relentless advance against the Africa Corps and the Italians was paying dividends. Exactly 3 months after El Alamein, Tripoli became the very first Axis city to fall to the Allies. In Tripoli, the 8th Army liberated a concentration camp containing 2,500 Jewish prisoners. Rommel, in his memoirs, called the Desert Campaign War Without Hate, but these people had been unknowingly awaiting the arrival of an Einsatzgruppen extermination unit intended to murder North Africa's Jews. The SS butchers were then to move into Palestine should the good General Rommel be victorious. In November 2012, Kelvin Crombie, an Australian researcher, launched El Alamein, halting a possible Holocaust in the Middle East, in the British House of Lords. Montgomery's son David was in attendance, along with politicians, religious leaders, and 8th Army veterans. Crombie revealed that the Jewish community in Palestine presented Montgomery with a Hebrew Bible in 1948 for his role in saving over 500,000 Jews in Egypt and Palestine. The inscription states, "Field Marshal Montgomery, the gallant leader of the victorious forces by whose hand God has placed salvation in Zion." Success began to bring the first warning signs that Monty was a difficult ally. In February of 1943, Montgomery bet Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, that he would take Sfax by the 15th of April. The American general remarked that if Monty could achieve this, then Ike would give him anything he desired. When Monty captured the city on the 10th of April, he sent Eisenhower a message demanding a plane for his personal use. 6 days later, he received a B-17 Flying Fortress complete with an American crew as a gift from the ever honourable Ike. Monty's boss, Brooke, was angry with him, claiming that Eisenhower was furious because the bet had been a simple joke. Montgomery was unrepentant, insisting it was no joke at the time. He used his American plane and pilots until the end of the war. Montgomery would test the patience of Eisenhower for the rest of the war. But Bedell Smith would provide the most succinct summary of Monty the General. You may be great to serve under, difficult to serve alongside, but you sure are hell to serve over. Churchill too was also struggling to cope with the overwhelming self-belief of his most famous general, complaining in summer 1943 that Monty was unforgettable in defeat and insufferable in victory. Monty had a lot to be insufferable about. It is fashionable nowadays to view the campaign in North Africa as a distraction from the real war in Europe. This is an error. Hitler's decision to send massive reinforcements to Rommel after El Alamein would prove disastrous. Axis losses in North Africa actually ended up being greater than in Stalingrad.
Despite differences in military philosophy, the Scottish military historian Trevor Royal correctly points out that Montgomery and Rommel had much in common. Both cared about the men under them, their training and their equipment. Both motivated the troops by regular visits to them. Both could be impatient with their allies. They were both extremely physically fit and men who lived Spartan lifestyles. They were vain, publicity hungry and good with the press. They were adored by the public back at home. Montgomery even hung Rommel's portrait on the wall of his cabin to remind himself and his men of the great adversary they were facing. There was one huge difference though. Monty was the winner.
With victory in North Africa assured, Montgomery's attention turned to the planned invasion of Sicily. His relations with other commanders, especially the Americans, began to deteriorate. He started by criticizing the plans for the landings agreed by Eisenhower and Alexander, Monty's British superior in the Mediterranean. He correctly realized they would cause a dispersion of effort, allowing Axis forces on the island the chance to destroy the Allies before they could establish secure positions. His alternative proposal was accepted. Montgomery also wanted the British, Canadian and American armies to work in unison as a single force on Sicily. Naturally, he believed he was the ideal field commander to wield this weapon. The American leaders had other ideas. Bradley felt Montgomery was unfairly trying to steal the limelight. Patton was characteristically blunt, dismissing him as a cocky little limey fart. Monty's opinion of Patton was no higher, calling his ally a foul-mouthed lover of war. Too much has been made of the rivalry between Montgomery and Patton. Their dislike was personal, but they respected one another as generals, though each was convinced he was greater than the other. Patton said, "Monty is a forceful, selfish man, but still a man. I think he is a far better leader than Alexander." Adding a few months later that, "I know I can outfight that little fart anytime." They even had more in common than their vanity and success on the battlefield. Old Blood and Guts actually had a high-pitched voice, much like Monty. He was a great student of warfare, honest to a fault, and cared deeply about his men. Both were greatly respected by the German generals. But there were differences. Patton was from a very rich family, had unorthodox religious beliefs involving reincarnation, and was racist and anti-Semitic. Monty's background was of financial difficulties, uncomplicated Christianity, and no prejudices or snobbery. Nor would Montgomery ever have countenanced slapping a shell-shocked soldier. Patton's real bête noire was Bradley, whereas Monty's fall guy was Eisenhower. Monty believed Eisenhower was an inexperienced and indecisive field commander. There was truth in this, but he failed to recognize fully Eisenhower's greater virtues: patience, tact, diplomacy, and an ability to hold together an alliance containing such difficult characters. This clash of strong personalities contributed to the fact that the Anglo-Canadian and US forces virtually operated separately and progressed slowly. Victory was achieved, but at a heavy cost in casualties, and the Axis evacuated over 100,000 troops across the Strait of Messina to mainland Italy, troops who would help cause immense problems for the Allies on the Italian peninsula. One rare moment of levity in Sicily came when Monty made another wager, this time with Ike. He bet Eisenhower £5 that the war would go on into 1945. Just before Christmas 1944, he reminded Ike, who promptly paid up on the 26th of December. Monty donated all money he won in bets with fellow generals to his favourite charities. Montgomery led his 8th Army into mainland Europe via the invasion of Italy. But this campaign repeated all of the mistakes he had warned of before Sicily. Dispersion of effort, which nearly caused disaster for the Allied landings, lack of coordination between the British and Americans, underestimation of the Germans, and, in General Mark W. Clark, a commander whose egomania eclipsed that of Patton and Monty, but without their genius for war. When on the 23rd of December 1943 he was recalled to England to lead the planning for Operation Overlord, Montgomery was delighted to leave the dog's breakfast of Italy. Monty immediately realized the invasion plans were, as for Sicily, inadequate. Dispersion of forces would give Rommel the chance to slaughter Allied troops on the beaches. This would also prolong the war and lead to untold additional and unnecessary deaths on both sides. Monty convinced Eisenhower of the need to land 5 full divisions instantly, then quickly reinforce them with hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The logistical, training, tactical and strategic challenges were immense, yet Monty relished them. After a visit to Montgomery to discuss the invasion plans, even Patton was impressed and observed, "Monty is an actor, but not a fool." Monty relished having a double impersonate of him in front of crowds of thousands, but also worried that Clifton James, the actor involved, would be an obvious assassination target. So he insisted that the War Office pay him a full general's salary during the time he was required. Clifton James met an old lady after the war who recognized him as Monty's double. "He is a wonderful man. My son was one of his soldiers. When he was killed, I wrote to the general about him, and he wrote back. Now he sends me a letter every Christmas. My son would have been so proud to know that." James wrote, "Monty brought great consolation to that old lady, and it was all done in secret." On the 24th of March 1944, Montgomery made his first ever public speech to a non-military audience. He took his motto for the forthcoming invasion from the Sword of State of British coronation ceremonies: "With this sword do justice, stop the growth of iniquity." Monty's obsession with preserving as many soldiers' lives as possible really came to the fore in the run-up to the Normandy landings. "What's your most valuable possession?" Monty asked a soldier before D-Day. "My rifle, sir." "No, it isn't. It's your life, and I'm going to save it for you. Despite not gambling with human lives, Monty was still making successful bets. On the 1st of June 1944, Patton bet him that Britain's armed forces would be involved in another war in Europe within 10 years of the end of World War II. Only Patton's premature death prevented Monty from claiming yet another prize for charity. His one mistake in this period was to set an overly optimistic schedule for the objectives he hoped to achieve after D-Day, when he presented his plans to Allied commanders. His trusted aides, and even Bradley, cautioned him against doing so, but Monty went ahead. This would lead British military historian Liddell Hart to remark that Overlord went according to plan, but not according to timetable. Monty had correctly guessed the Germans would expect him, the Allies' most successful general, to lead the battle-hardened British and Canadian armies in an attempted breakout from Normandy in the east. So he planned a very nasty surprise for the Nazis. The Americans would drive west to lead the breakout. Monty would engage the bulk of the German defenders in a grinding battle of attrition to make this possible. He knew this battle would be horrendously difficult and slow. They would be fighting the cream of the Wehrmacht, who had been preparing for this battle for years. And they would be led by a brilliant enemy general, Rommel. He also knew Britain was running out of manpower. So, when Churchill passed on American criticisms of Monty's caution in Normandy, he was brusquely reminded, "It was you, Prime Minister, who told me that we must not suffer casualties on the scale of the Somme." Monty did avoid such carnage, and he did defeat Rommel once again. In August 1944, Hitler described the success of Monty's long-planned breakout from Normandy as the decisive battle of the war and the worst day of my life. For many historians, victory in Normandy is Monty's greatest ever achievement. However, the scale of the victory was so huge and the German collapse in Normandy came so suddenly that Montgomery and the other Allied commanders were not ready to take advantage of their success. This gave the fleeing Germans time to regroup and prepare the staunch defense of the Reich's western approaches. Monty made one final attempt to win the war quickly. He wanted a 40-division thrust to the Ruhr that would be unstoppable. But Ike would not commit all available resources to this and preferred a broad front strategy. Monty still hoped he could drive a stake into the heart of Nazi Germany before 1945. It would lead to his most famous failure at a bridge too far. Market Garden was the largest airborne assault in history, but British paratrooper General Boy Browning made two crucial errors. He failed to heed intelligence reports that two panzer divisions were refitting nearby, and he didn't take enough anti-tank weaponry to fight them. On the ground, General Dempsey, in charge of the armoured forces, did not heed Monty's order for his land advance to be rapid and violent without regard to what is happening on the flanks. Monty did accept the blame in his memoirs for the paratroopers being dropped too far from the bridge at Arnhem. His other great mistake, he admitted, was underestimating the difficulty of capturing Antwerp at the same time as his drive to the Ruhr. The other contributing factors he identified for Market Garden's failure were it was not given total priority by Ike, the poor weather, and assuming that the refitting panzer divisions he knew were in the area would not be able to fight effectively. Waffen-SS General Wilhelm Bittrich, famed as the most sarcastic man in Germany, observed of the Allied paratroopers, "In all my years as a soldier, I have never seen men fight so hard." But it was to no avail. The 1st Airborne Division was destroyed, and Monty did not end the war in the winter of 1944. In fact, the war was about to get much hotter than he or his colleagues could imagine. On the 15th of December 1944, Monty sent a report to Ike that the Germans cannot stage major offensive operations. This was just before Hitler's vast surprise counteroffensive through Bradley's lightly defended Ardennes region. Ike temporarily gave Monty command of an American army to help retrieve what was proving a disastrous situation. Montgomery saved the entire US 7th Armored Division, and yet he would also shoot himself in the foot. Max Hastings, no fan of Monty's, said of his contribution to the Battle of the Bulge, "At a time when there was disarray, the foxy little field marshal kept his balance. Coolly and calmly, he redeployed British and American forces to create a solid northern front. Montgomery displayed the quality most vital to a commander in crisis: grip. Many Americans who detested him applauded his contribution, but he could not bring himself to behave gracefully."
Monty insulted the friendly American generals Simpson and Hodges. He harped on about his desire to be the single field commander of all Allied forces. Then he gave a catastrophic press conference in which most people thought he was both patronising the American army and attempting to take all of the credit for himself. His performance has blemished his reputation for decades ever since, when historians discuss his contribution to the Battle of the Bulge. However, Carlo d'Este, perhaps the greatest living authority on Patton, has described Monty as the most misunderstood general. D'Este claims that Monty's contribution to the Battle of the Bulge in the worst European winter for 50 years was decisive and amongst the very greatest of his military achievements.
The German delegation will now sign this paper, and they will sign in order of seniority.
In the spring of 1945, the German forces in the west surrendered to him on Lüneburg Heath. Yet victory did not relax Monty's Spartan habits. He glared at one nervous German officer who came to the surrender ceremony in his tent and took out a cigarette to calm his nerves. Monty's disgusted look of disapproval made the agitated general quickly hide his cigarette. On the 8th of May 1945, Churchill wrote that future generations will remember the commander who marched from Egypt through Tripoli, Tunis, Sicily and southern Italy, and through France, Belgium, Holland and Germany to the Baltic and the Elbe without losing a battle or even a serious action. Under interrogation, German Field Marshal von Rundstedt concurred. He insisted that Montgomery was Britain's outstanding general. He has proved it in Libya, Tunisia, Italy, and again since D-Day. In May 1945, Monty also met up with his tall, well-dressed and handsome Soviet counterpart, Marshal Rokossovsky. The Russian's assistant could not believe Monty turned down offers of fine wines, exquisite cigars, and beautiful Russian female company. He doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and doesn't like women. What the devil does he do all day? In September 1945, Montgomery refused monetary awards for success in the war offered to the major commanders. He also surprised his defeated enemies by proving to be a magnanimous military governor of the British-occupied zone of Germany, saying, "We must give the German people hope for the future." He showed his sense of justice by signing death sentences for war criminals, women included, but insisting they be executed as humanely as possible to prove the victors were not sadists. To that end, he personally invited British public executioner Albert Pierrepoint to conduct the hangings. Pierrepoint was famous for guaranteeing instant, dignified deaths for the condemned. He held no truck with those like Patton who yearned to fight the Soviets. He even ignored a foolish request from Churchill to be prepared for Operation Unthinkable. Professor David Reynolds found a handwritten note by Montgomery confirming he received a verbal order from Churchill to stack German weapons in case they might be needed to fight the Russians. The PM got very steamed up about the Russians. He ordered that I was not to destroy the weapons of the 2 million Germans who had surrendered on Lüneburg Heath. We might have to fight the Russians with German help. I waited for 1 week. I then gave orders for all the personal weapons and equipment to be destroyed. In the House of Lords in 1962, he would reiterate the folly of such thinking. Rule 1 on page 1 of the Book of War is, "Do not march on Moscow." Various people have tried it, Napoleon and Hitler, and it is no good. After the war, he remained as wittily vain as ever. When asked to name history's 3 greatest generals, he replied, "The other 2 would be Alexander the Great and Napoleon." More serious verdicts on Monty come from the great contemporary historians. Andrew Roberts says he was disciplined, focused, adaptable, a meticulous planner, quick to dismiss the incompetent, respectful of the Germans' capacity for counterattack. Roberts also agrees with the late A.J.P. Taylor's opinion of Montgomery. For all that Monty was irascible, opinionated and egotistical, he was also the greatest British field commander since the Duke of Wellington. His own Chief of Staff, de Guingamp, said, between 1919 and 1945, he was, indisputably, the greatest military field commander our nation managed to produce. He commanded men's loyalty because he was so utterly, ruthlessly professional. But the great warrior's later years were gently dedicated to gardening and writing. Above all, he was lonely. He outlived his beloved wife by 40 years and found no one else to share his existence. Nor did the fame and countless honours bestowed on him remove the great doubt that haunted the man of war, who was also a man of God. A month before his death in 1976, Monty revealed both his faith and his conscience to his close friend, the newspaper editor Sir Dennis Hamilton. "I couldn't sleep last night. I had great difficulty. I can't have very long to go now. I've got to go and meet God and explain all those men I killed at Alamein."